What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity, interviewing a multitude of builders across Web3. This is going to be a really fascinating podcast today. Super excited to have Micha Roon with us, head of engineering at the Hashgraph Group. I want to give a shout out to the Hashgraph Association for helping to put these podcasts together, but we're going to be diving deep into decentralized identity. Micha has some amazing perspectives about what this means for kind of real world adoption. I always like to start these out with a little bit of an intro and a background. Micha, if you could just give us a brief overview of your background in blockchain and your role and focus at the Hashgraph Group as we get ramped up here, that'd be great.
Thank you for having me, Solomon. So yeah, sure. I am the head of engineering at the Hashgraph Group. I'm a trained software developer, live in Switzerland, and trained and worked most of my life here. And in 2016, I fell in love with smart contracts and have been doing that ever since. And actually, in 2020, I fell in love with digital identity. I think it's a great use case. The other great use case that we haven't seen emerge yet is regulatory technology, which I don't understand. Blockchain should be an accountant's wet dream. It's marvel. Anyways, I was hired by Kamal to build the engineering team, and when I started 2 years ago, there were 3, and now we are 70. So we have grown quite a bit, and this takes up most of my time. But I still have some time to devote to new technology and doing some research and making sure that the engineers that work in the organization do the right things and do the things right.
That's awesome. No, and it's great to hear that the team is scaling as well. I remember kind of digging through and doing some prep work for this interview and reading through some of your posts before, and I always it kind of made me chuckle because it says you're a decentralization maxi, which I think is really, really cool. Can you talk about that though? I mean, I think when we met for the first time, you said decentralized identity is one of the key pillars of adoption for this technology. Can you just break down kind of what you mean by DID as a key pillar for adoption?
Well, identity is very central to everything we do. Everyone, and maybe we should actually take a step back and define what is identity, because it is misconceived. So we all have an identity, and this identity is composed of an identifier, which is our social security number or the corresponding number that identifies you in your country. And then on top of that, you have a bunch of credentials, which is your driver's license, your passport, your university degree, etc. And all these credentials put together, associated with this unique identifier, make up your identity. And today, this is all analog and human readable only. And what we want to do is to bring this to the digital world and make it machine readable and machine verifiable. And I think this verifiable part is the very important thing. And it is required also from a legal point of view, because you cannot open a bank account, you cannot do financial transactions in any meaningful volume if you cannot be identified. And so this is why I really believe that it's a pillar of adoption, because by being able to prove that I am a human, I am real, I am a citizen of a country, I am legally allowed to do something because I'm the right age, etc. This will enable so much more to move to the digital world.
For sure. I think one of the interesting things there, and right now, the process in a lot of different systems, like let's use maybe healthcare as an example. Like whenever you go to a new doctor, it's a great example because you have to give basically a drop of blood, and every piece of information that you've ever had about yourself, your entire medical record, all this stuff. And it's always interesting because I think we are headed towards a society and a world where this ties a little bit into some of the tech stuff, like with the zero knowledge stuff. Like, you're only going to really have to enter in exactly what you need to enter in to participate in something. So, like, maybe there's something that you want to participate in, but that the low hanging fruit is just your age. You have to meet a
Mm.
certain age threshold, but no other personal identifiers are necessary to participate in that other than age. So, like, I think it's interesting right now that stuff is so fragmented to the point that you have to enter in absolutely all credentials that you have to participate in like something that
Yeah.
is sometimes like super remedial. Like, tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing with the Hashgraph Group as far as DID is concerned as we kind of roll into this.
Mm. So we actually started building our identity platform for two main use cases. The first one was a bank, which is one of the governing council, and they wanted to make it more streamlined for the customers. So they wanted to give their customers digital identities so that you could decentralize the profile. So if you are a retail customer, you get a credential. Solomon is a retail customer. And then when you come back and you want a car loan because you want a new car, this is a different division in the bank, and you would actually have to re-KYC with this new division. They do not share the data. Everything is siloed. And by decentralizing the information, you could avoid this re-KYC and make the user experience more streamlined and also more digital. And so this was their goal. And then we worked together with the Ministry of Education in Morocco to put on chain, or actually not on chain, but to make it verifiable student credentials. So the fact that you are a student, the fact that you passed your high school diploma, that you are a teacher, etc. All these credentials could be put in your wallet, and you can then present these to future employers, to other universities where you want to go study. And that is also where I learned that for students who want to go to study in another country, it is very difficult actually to put together your all the transcripts from all your courses and your grades, etc., that you can present. It's a lengthy, expensive, and time-consuming process. Whereas if we put all this in the format of verifiable credentials, you could just present it to the other university and be done with it, and it's very efficient. And I never had to do that because I'm part of Erasmus here in Europe, and so we had agreements.
I think it's really interesting, and what you mentioned about one of the banking integrations with one bank, how different
Mhm.
divisions within the bank are siloed to the point that a customer's credentials can't even migrate between different divisions internally in one bank. So, like, and that paints a really interesting picture because then you think about, okay, well, that's just one bank. And I'm sure the majority of banks operate very similarly.
Mhm.
So, like, what's interesting to me is that, like, we think about like distributed ledger technology or digital identity as like solving pain points within traditional businesses. I can imagine the amount of overhead that these banks have to carry, whether it's personnel or whatever, for different departments just to verify the same thing from different divisions of the bank. It's pretty crazy when you think about that on kind of a global scale. And I don't even know if you can put that into numbers with how much overhead like exists
No.
globally with fragmentation. It's kind of like it's like an intangible thing that we all know exists.
Mhm.
So you put together a really interesting kind of thought piece and breakdown, decentralized identity for system integration, and kind of thinking of DID as a universal power adapter, which I thought was a really cool way of phrasing it. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean as universal power adapter and what you kind of go through here in the systems and integration document that you
Mhm.
posted?
Yes, so the idea is that every verifiable credential that you issue, and everybody can be an issuer. I mean, if you have a DID, you can issue credential because credential is just a signed piece of data. It's a JSON document that has a signature. And because it has a signature, you can verify its origin. And you can prove its origin, and you can prove the timestamp if you anchor it on chain. So you don't have to provide the data publicly on chain, but you can anchor the thing on chain. And this fact that you can reuse the credential in many places makes it this universal data vessel. And it can be used for showing your profile, but it can also be used for giving an identity to objects, giving an identity to events. So let's think of a business process. When you look at business process management systems, every business process gets instantiated and it has actually an identity and an ID, at least in the system. So you could create an identity for the business process and then issue the data for the business process to this identity. And then this identity becomes the container of all the data that has been processed. And if you want to have it timestamped, then you can use HCS to add timestamps. So now let's take this process one step further as an integration point, and you have this verifiable credential that everybody understands because it's JSON. You have this universal authentication method, which is the digital signature, so everybody can authenticate that the origin of the data is correct. And it solves a lot of the problems that you have with data integration, because the first problem with data processing is you have to identify the origin of the data. So the two servers that exchange the data need to authenticate to each other so that the sender knows that they're sending to the right place and the recipient knows they're receiving from the right place. Well, you don't have that problem anymore because you can authenticate your recipient. And as a recipient, you can just ingest and then verify that the data is correct. And this can also create a lot of advantages when it comes to personal data management. Think of all this data about yourself that is held in silos of databases all over the place because they want to be able to recognize you when you come back. But it's not just that they want to recognize you when you come back, they also want to be sure that they can access the correct data about you. Now, if you can provide the data every time you go to some place, and the server that you provide the data to can verify that this data is correct because the server has issued it to you. So you present it back and it can verify that it really came from it. Then it doesn't need to hold all your personal data anymore. And we can avoid the honeypots. So you would not have data breaches anymore because there would be no big data pot to breach. You would have to go and breach every single user individually, which is much more labor consuming than breaching just a single server. And a lot less rewarding because you don't have this data lake that you can just siphon away. So I think there are a lot of advantages, and this is actually the decentralized ethos that I'm talking about when I say I'm a decentralization maximalist. This is what I believe. Everybody should be sovereign over their own data, and we should not have to trust all these service providers. We should be able to verify.
Yeah. No, sorry, continue. Please go ahead. I agree.
And the the other nice thing about digital identity as an integration point is today, when you access a service, you trust that it's okay. You look at your browser, and if the URL is green, you say, yeah, it's probably right. But then you don't know that you have reached the right place. You don't know, and in most cases it doesn't really matter because all you want is to look at cat videos. But in some cases it does matter because you're looking for an investment and you want to know, is this investment company a real investment company? Do they have a license to sell me an investment, or is this a scam? And today this is very difficult to learn. Well, again, if the organization had a digital identity, they could actually prove to you that they are a legitimate organization and they have a license, because a license would be a credential and you could verify this credential. And because you trust the government, well, that's another thing, but the government is the issuer of the license. And if you trust the government, then you would trust the license and you would trust the organization that presents it to you. And
I
this
think,
two-way verification, I think this is very powerful, and we need decentralized identity for that.
yeah, I think, it's really interesting how much kind of ties in. And I think one of the bigger misconceptions whenever people that might not be as kind of familiar with what's kind of going on or being built make is when they see decentralized identity or digital identity or DID, they immediately kind of go to the worst case scenario, and it's like, nobody's going to do that. And really what it's kind of about is, like you mentioned, it's kind of like self-sovereignty and empowerment and kind of custodianship of your own data, which doesn't really exist, right now, number one. And then number two, it's not just about kind of proof of personhood type things. It's people, places, things, assets, events, as you mentioned, which kind of leads me into, I think one of the things that we've seen over the past 12 to 18 months, that I don't even think is a narrative, it's just happening for adoption, is like the RWA tokenization. How much does, I would imagine that I'm going to answer my own question here. Identity has got to be at the core of RWA tokenization for it to make sense and for adoption to continue. We have to be able to identify what's being tokenized to be able to then do whatever we want to with it. But can you talk about that, the benefits of identity and decentralized identity and the role in tokenized RWAs, or what you foresee happening here?
Mm-hmm. So when you tokenize something, what you basically do is you give it an identity, because you create an NFT that represents that thing. And now the NFT in itself contains, or can contain, a lot of metadata. And this metadata today, and this is what makes tokenization so difficult, is not standardized at all. And with the IDs, what we can achieve is the standardization of the data that is attached to these tokens. And that is a very powerful thing, again, to have these digital product passports, as they are called in the jargon. You have an NFT that represents a digital product passport, and then to this NFT, you attach all these credentials, and you attach credentials about this object. And then the verifier can go and read all the credentials and verify that they originate with a trustworthy source and that these can be believed. And that is where the auditor could come in and kind of provide their stamp of approval and say, oh, nice, yes, I support this claim, and hence the regulator would also believe you and give you a tax rebate or whatever. But this product passport part is definitely empowered by identity. And the product passport can be attached to a phone, a house, a screen, whatever. When it comes to raw materials, it becomes a bit more complex, because there we talk about batches and not product anymore. So if you want to tokenize electricity, for example, which is also a real world asset, it's more difficult to create an NFT about it, but still it's possible. So you can create an NFT that represents 15 minutes of electricity production at a certain moment in time. And from a specific source, let's say a solar farm, and there, because you have the credentials, it has been issued. So the NFT has been minted by the right address, and it contains the right credentials, and the installation has been audited by a trustworthy auditor that you trust, etc., etc. So all this data combined makes that you believe the renewable energy certificate that has been minted with this NFT. And so whenever people tell you, oh, we can just tokenize that, yes, that is the easy part, but how do you create the trust?
I think it's really interesting, and you mentioned kind of this time-stamped 15 minutes of electricity as an RWA. It leads me into like when I think about like RWAs and tokenization, and I'll go maybe off the rails here just briefly. I think we live in a world where the attention economy is a very real thing, but it's outside of like kind of some of like these just gigantic platforms, it's hard to kind of measure what that actually looks like, because even in these big platforms, like Twitter and X, which we're on right now, certainly have the data for all, their customers, and they know what people are engaging with and not engaging with. And as we move forward, and self-custodianship of data is a really interesting thing. And it leads me into like, we're thinking such small potatoes, even with RWA tokenization, where I believe 15, 20 years from now, individual data is very much so a real world asset. It's just not in the hands of the people right now. Like, Twitter and X are free for a reason. You can use it for free for a reason, because we're the products on Twitter and X. Eventually, I think that like our attention even could lead into like monetization at the individual level for what we choose to spend time within. And that's really interesting for me to think of kind of as well. I want to kind of get into, you mentioned the banking and kind of the KYC example. I would love if you could maybe expand just briefly on what you think DID is going to represent for disconnected systems, how it's going to kind of connect these systems. One thing we hear in crypto and blockchain all the time is interoperability. All these chains eventually are going to interoperate. Do you feel like that's maybe not understanding exactly how it's going to shake out, and maybe that if we have message like identity nailed, and there's kind of a standard from a DID standpoint, that solves a lot of the interoperability stuff? Or maybe just your broad thoughts on how this is going to shake out? I know that's like 5 questions in one. Sorry.
No. So the interoperability problem between chains or between networks is more a technical problem than an identity problem. And there are some solutions that have been suggested already. We have IBC from the Cosmos network, we have XCM from Polkadot, and we have another acronym that I can't remember from Avalanche. And so these systems will compete, and at some point, well, one of them will probably win, and then we will have the TCP/IP of blockchains, and everybody can interoperate. Because nobody remembers, but before the internet, there were other types of networks, and these also competed, and that in the end, the open one and the one that was resilient and the one that was free to use won. And I see that also happening in blockchain, that at some points we will have interoperability, and then you will have preference. You will build maybe your Polkadot substrate chain because you're more of a Rust guy, or you will build it with something else because you're more of a Golang guy. But if you go one level up on the application layer, that is where identity really matters, because whatever the technical underlying system is, you will still need to have a user profile, and you still need to have authorization. So there are some things you are allowed to do and some things you're not allowed to do. And today is very complex and very difficult to create authorization in smart contracts. There is no central repository for credentials, and most networks cannot verify credentials. Actually, it's very difficult to do because it's time consuming and it uses too much gas. So we need to find a solution in which smart contracts actually can verify credentials, so that we can move to what I like to call away from the user access list to the user access rule. And you can create a smart contract where you say, I accept transactions from any KYC customer that comes from a country that is not on the ban list. And voila, I don't care who you are. I care about the credentials that you bring. And then my system becomes simpler because I don't need to manage this long list. And maybe I misidentified you and you are Iranian in the end, or maybe you change, your status changes, and I need to keep track of that. Whereas in a rule-based system, I don't need to keep track of that. I just need to be in a system that keeps track of that. And then I can delegate this task to somebody else. We already have these systems, actually. You have a lot of companies who do observe individuals and kind of alert you, oh, this is a politically exposed person. You should not give it a loan because it will damage your reputation. So we have these systems, but they are really difficult to integrate into smart contract systems. And that is where I see the interconnection.
I'm curious from your stance, what you think about kind of even at kind of the institutional or the enterprise level. Like it seems like as adoption occurs, like there's going to have to be like some sort of role-based hierarchy and access, which ties directly kind of into the identity stuff too, where like maybe I found it interesting, and I won't dive too deep into it, but I found like a DTCC application. I'm not going to say it's an approved or granted patent, but it's an application that had this hierarchy of role-based access for like what happens after an asset's tokenized. Where's kind of the foundational wallet and what access and roles does that have? And then there's this like kind of tree structure of like different wallets underneath it. But maybe to broaden it out, like, do you think that, enterprise role-based access type things are going to have to kind of happen, and identity tying into that as well?
Oh, yes. I think once the regulator comes in and mandates it, for sure, but even before that, it actually provides you with a competitive advantage. Today, people sign contracts that are impossible to enforce. For example, I promise you that as a contractor, I'm a contractor, I'm building your house. As a contractor, all of my employees are certified builders. My electrician is an electrical engineer. My plumber is a plumbing engineer, whatever. You're not going to ask them for their certificates when they come to build your house. So how do you check? How do you make sure? The only time you actually can make sure is if shit hits the fan and you go to your insurance company and your insurance company comes back to me and says, Micha, show me the credentials. And I say, but yeah, maybe. And so we live in a system where we trust by default, which is nice because most people are honest, but in some cases we shouldn't. And same thing with banks. Banks are honest by default, but they have proven themselves wrong many times. So having this ability to kind of you as the customer of a building company, you can just scan a QR code on the phone of the people that come to work on your building site. and you know that the guy is an electrical engineer and they cannot fake it. That's progress. If you go to the corporate world, if I promise you that all my accountants are whatever certified, well, now I can prove it to you. I can prove it that the accountant that has approved this transaction is actually certified to approve the transaction. And I can prove it because I can share the credential. And that is a step forward in maybe it will provide you a discount on your insurance policy, or maybe it will provide you some other advantage. But it is an advantage. And I think the corporate world still needs to wake up to that. And there is still too much trust and too little verification in some very crucial domains.
Do you think that and you mentioned competitive advantage, and I think that we're at a really interesting time right now with kind of the rise of all the stuff going on with artificial intelligence, and even getting into like all the deep fake stuff that's going on right now, how difficult it is to actually verify that something is real. And that's only going to get more and more difficult. I know we've had Lehman has said this a couple of times, that you're going to have to digitally sign things to kind of authenticate. What's your thought process on how digital identity, decentralized identifiers, things like that can actually solve a lot of the pain points that the world is about to face with, like, let's start with deep fakes and some of that stuff, because it's going to impact all sorts of industries.
Well, the deepfake technology is too good to recognize already. So I have seen demos of deepfake videos where the person is shining a light on their face and it is reflected in the fake. So it's really super powerful already, and that the liveness check doesn't work anymore. So you can ask your deepfake to turn its head, and the voice is faked as well. I mean, there's no way that a human or even a machine, I guess, can recognize a fake in a video call today. And so we will need pretty soon some solutions that enable organizations, banks, and are the typical suspects here, but others as well, to recognize people from AI agents. And there, definitely, the IDs are very powerful. That no AI can steal my ID because it's on my phone, it's in my trusted execution environment. It's really hard to steal a private key from a phone. You'd be surprised. So these really have an hardened encryption environments, and they do the signing without revealing the key. So it's very difficult to steal the keys. And the only thing you would need to do is scan a QR code on your screen and you're good to go.
So I think one of the other areas of AI is kind of which we've really seen ramp up, I would say, over the past 6 to 9 months, is all the agentic AI stuff. Are current schemas ready for like, are current agentic AI schemes like ready for like total automation and like delegation, like, and all that stuff, like, or no? And how does DID kind of help with agentic AI in that regard?
Indeed, I think no. It's when you take the example of you log in with your social account, log in with Google or log in with Facebook. They ask you, do you allow this application to access all your data or none of your data? There is no in between. And so we need a lot more fine-grained authorization systems if we want to delegate something to an AI agent. I want the AI agent to be able to use my credit card, but not for amounts over $100 and not for more than $500 a day, or whatever the limits I set. I want this to be enforced. And am I ready to trust the AI vendor, or do I want to have another mechanism that enforces that? And personally, I'm leaning towards the latter because I like the agent vendor because they provide a good tool, but I'm not necessarily trusting them. They might actually be a teenage developer in a basement, for all I know. So, it would be good that I can change vendor and still the AI agent would comply by the rules that I have set, and I can reuse the same rules for the new AI agent. And there, the delegation of credential becomes really powerful because I could delegate to this AI agent the use of just one credential or just a group of credentials that gives it a certain level of access to an application. But for this to work, well, the application needs to understand credentials and the agent needs to understand credentials. Agents are new, so they will probably understand credentials much sooner than the applications, but the applications need to switch. But that is where I see the big hurdle, but actually it's cheaper to do credential verification than what we do today. So I think there is an incentive for applications to change.
I want to ask, and this might be kind of like there's probably multiple areas of technology, including, decentralized identity and then certainly DLT and blockchain, but biggest sectors of adoption currently, from the decentralized identity standpoint, finance, healthcare, supply chain, education, like where is the most traction occurring right now, and what would you expect to see kind of over time?
I think the most traction is in supply chain traceability because it's one of the domains that has the most pressing needs. Um, and it comes from regulation. The European Union is mandating that in the near future they have changed the goalpost. So I'm not saying dates anymore, but in the near future they will mandate that you prove that you have paid for the CO2 emissions of your product. And in order to provide this proof, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And the ID and traceability and blockchain traceability can solve these issues in a very cost-effective manner. And so I think this will be in the next 18 to 24 months, this will be a very big movement. Then, yeah, I guess that for organizations, it will also be a very big driver. We already see in the EU, for example, in the Netherlands, and I think in the US as well, if you have an organization and you want to register it, you need a global legal entity identifier. And these legal entity identifiers, they also come in the digital format. There's the VLEI. And these verifiable legal entity identifiers are the IDs, and they will enable you to sign your invoices, to sign your accounts, to interact with your banks, etc. But there are some limitations to the LEI system, and I think we can complement this LEI system with some additional functionality that we can build on Hedera.
I think it's interesting too because like right now, there's different jurisdictions that, and I feel like a lot of the stuff is happening in tandem. Like I feel like for decentralized identity to take off, you also kind of need different things kind of happening globally. Like, so one example would be like in the UK a couple of years ago, the digital documentation, there was digital documentation regulation that passed, and that stuff is kind of going live globally at different times as well. And obviously, that ties in where if you build a verifiable, credential, and you need to have some sort of digital documentation that also goes along with that, like, it's easier if that digital documentation is mandated, like in jurisdictions. So I think that's pretty interesting too. So I'm curious from your standpoint, kind of the key barriers to adoption with implementing decentralized identity? Is it just, like you mentioned, the product passports and supply chain pain points being solved? Is it user experience is a little bit too complex still? Standards, incentives, whatever your thought process is for barriers to adoption right now, and what you think some of the things that break those barriers down are going to be.
Well, I'm not entirely sure as to what is preventing widespread adoption. I guess the first thing is that nobody has created, to my knowledge, an easy to use, easy to integrate solution for digital identity and trusted solution for this digital identity. And so for an organization, there is no big incentive. So if we interact and I tell you my invoices are all digitally signed, well, thank you, but why? And I can tell you because I want to avoid invoice fraud. And if you pay an invoice that is not signed, well, you risk paying it to the wrong person. And invoice fraud costs the economy billions every year. I think it's to the tune of, I don't want to say bogus numbers because I don't have them on the top of my head, but it's tens of billions of dollars. It's huge numbers. And that is just in the US. If you look in the EU, around the world, it's really big numbers. And signing your invoices would be very easy, and it would solve the problem because you could identify the origin of your invoices. But nobody's doing it, I guess, because in the big scheme of things, it's not pressing enough. I don't know, and not enough people have fallen victim. The same thing is with signing your emails. I mean, nobody's signing their emails. Why not? But because we're not victim to fraud every day, and so the system works pretty fine as it is. I think that is the biggest hurdle. There is no pressing need for it. The systems that we have today work pretty okay, and yeah, criminals get arrested from time to time, so it's fine.
So I looked it up. U.S. businesses lose an average. This is individual businesses of $300,000 per year to invoice fraud, translating to roughly $1.2 million in annual losses per company. Over 34,000 invoice fraud cases were identified in 1 year across 2,750 businesses. So yeah, it's probably one of those things that like it happens so much that it's almost immeasurable. You know what I mean? Which is pretty crazy.
And not all of it is reported, so you never know what the total number is.
I'm sure a lot of it's not, and people and a lot of these businesses just internally are like, "Oh crap, we're going to deal with we're dealing with this again." We're going to ramp down here, but I want to ask kind of what you think the societal implications are when decentralized identity is kind of implemented across the board, for privacy, for self-sovereignty, for automation, just kind of big picture societal implications for DID.
So once everyone has a DID and it is really private, and this is the part where we need to be careful because the states or some states will try to impose a DID that is only half private that the state can still look at. And this would be really bad. I think that the only way is that it is really self-sovereign and that you are sovereign over your data. But once this happens, it will create a lot of possibilities. And for example, social networks will not require a centralized authority anymore. And there are systems in which you can actually monetize social networks and social interaction without knowing everybody who is on them. I think as a society, I hope not, but I fear that there is a rise of totalitarianism in the world. And yeah, maybe this will push us over the edge and say, ooh, we have to be careful with the state. We need to keep more private. Exposing all of our data to these organizations has become too dangerous. My neighbor got arrested.
Yeah. Well, I want, you mentioned competitive advantage. I would love if you could just touch base on where you think the Hedera ecosystem excels for decentralized identity, decentralized identifiers. I know you mentioned HCS earlier for timestamping things, like just in general, where you think a network like Hedera can succeed in implementing DID, and whether it's in industries or maybe it's Web3 verticals, whatever it may be.
Hedera has a lot of things going for it, and that's why I'm a proud member of the ecosystem. One of the things is the predictable pricing. So creating an identity on Hedera costs, well, a fraction of a cent. You get actually 10,000 identity for $1. So it's really cheap to create your DID document. And then once you have that, creating or issuing credentials costs nothing. So anchoring, again, you get 10,000 anchors for $1, so it's really cheap. I think the fact that it's cheap, it's efficient, it's quick, that there's a lot of throughput is what businesses will like. And we have built something that does not exist yet in the ecosystem, which is a real end-to-end identity management system where you can create your identity, you can issue credentials, you can go and fetch the credentials, and you can define what is called the presentation definitions, which are what is the bundle of credentials that you need to present to me so that I can let you into my application. And by building this framework, we have created all the building blocks for enterprises to actually use that thing or use that identity solution. And I think that is where we have the big advantage. We can create the supply chain identity solution. You can create billions of identities on Hedera every year, and the network will not break down. So that is the big advantage. If you look at other systems and you want to create 1 trillion identities on Polygon in a year, I think the network operators will actually not be happy about that because it will create a lot of data. And even though the price will go up, the network will suffer and they will have issues. And that is actually unique on Hedera, that we have this stateless notary service, which nobody else has. All the other blockchains have only stateful notary services. So you have to store the data in order for it to be notarized. On Hedera, you actually don't store it. You just send it, it gets notarized, and then you get the proof back. And so I think this is the very powerful element, that we have both the stateful and the stateless notarization, and that with that we can fulfill every use case.
So you mentioned the end-to-end identity management framework that you guys have built. What's the status of that right now? You don't have to drop crazy alpha in this or anything, but what's the status of it? Is there a lot of interest from some of the different entities and stuff like that you guys deal with? Obviously,
Yes.
Hashgraph Group and Hashgraph Association deal with a lot of big enterprises. So
yes, there is a lot of interest. There was a demo yesterday, actually, and there was a lot of interest about it. So yeah, I think this is something that we will see in a lot of our grant projects coming in the next year.
awesome. I know that there's actually the Africa Hackathon. I know it's global, but the Africa Hackathon in collaboration with the Exponential Science Foundation, that's the Hashgraph Association, Exponential Science Foundation. It's $1 million hackathon. And I think Kamal, when I interviewed him last week or the week before, had mentioned one of the areas that you guys are seeing a lot of kind of uptick within some of those within the hackathon is identity, certainly. So that'll be really cool to watch as well. Lead us out here, Micha. What are you excited about for the future? You mentioned kind of the onset, building out the developer group. I know you've kind of told me before that that's going to even grow a lot further. Tell us about what you're excited about for the future at the Hashgraph Group. And yeah, thank you so much.
So I think, yeah, what excites me most is the fact that we are bringing blockchain to the enterprise and to production. And this is something that I wanted to do since I started. It's been almost 10 years. And I think I deployed one project to production in these 10 years. All the rest were proof of concepts or MVPs that were abandoned. And I really think now we are building for production, and we are building something that will make an impact. And this is really exciting.
That's awesome. And I know I mentioned, or we talked before, I think we'll probably have you back on. There's probably some other areas. I know we kind of definitively tackled decentralized identity during this one, but there's probably a few different areas that we can tackle. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. So let's definitely bring you back on in the near future. I want to mention to everybody, if you're interested in learning more about all the initiatives coming out of the Hashgraph Group, you can go to hashgraphtachgroup.com. Again, I want to give a shout out to the Hashgraph Association for helping us to put these podcasts together. It's hashgraph.swiss. Give the Hashgraph Association a follow on X at @_Hashgraph. And you can learn more about predictable fees on Hedera at hedera.com/fees. Micha, it's been awesome having you today. Thank you so much for your time. Hang out with me here for a second as I ramp this down, and let's do this again in the near future.